Brilliant. Just waiting for a question. We could probably.
Wait, online.
Oh, that's all.
Okay, thank you very much for turning up to the planning committee this morning. One item on the agenda, but we will start through with bits and pieces first. Apologies for absence, anyone.
Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Viv Thomas and Councillor Young.
Thank you. Declarations of interest? No one, thank you. Minutes of last meeting, do we agree with a quick record for those who are here? Thank you very much. And we now move on to the planning application. As I said, there's only one. There is a supplementary, so hope you read that, which is beside you. And the application is 385 Belfort Road, change of use. And Stephen, if you could take us through the report, thank you.
Sure. So this is a planning application for the change of use from a retail unit class EA to a hot food takeaway, which is a sui generis use class with associated works. This is the site location that shows the wider site of 308 Beaufort Road, which is located to the north side. The site comprises a retail unit to the front that has been established for some considerable time, with residential accommodation located to the rear. The application site specifically is formed of an extension that was granted consent in 2018 for a single retail unit that comprises the ground floor space with a kind of shop area to the front and toilets area to the rear, and then stairs up to a store on the first floor. Oh, sorry. I was using my cursor, I didn't know as you can see. So, yes, so to be clear there, the area I was just referring to is the area shaded in green. So this shows the proposed layout. So there would be internal modifications to facilitate the creation of hot food takeaway. So there would simply be a kitchen area with a counter. And the plan also there has a red box which indicates where refuse would be stored.
Sorry, would you be able to increase it's really difficult to get, or I can come and do.
I don't know if we can
I can relocate.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
Move forward.
Let's move it back. It's the opposite of what you think.
Yeah. Can you find your cursor as well, Stephen, or not? Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, right, so
Okay.
I'll just go back slightly then. So just to mention this again, so this is the site location plan that shows the site within the context of Beaufort Road running to the south, and Field View, a predominantly residential cul-de-sac that runs alongside. So it's a corner plot on Beaufort Road there. This shows the existing layout. So you have an existing long-established retail unit to the front that operates as a convenience food store. There's associated residential accommodation to the rear and on the floors above. In 2018, planning permission was granted for the construction of a single-storey extension to the side. Planning permission was granted for that to be used as a retail unit that would have been in the A1 use class originally. It's now referred to as the EA use class in the latest version of the use class order. So the proposal is specifically relating to the recent extension. So they would like the applicants are seeking consent to change the use of this space alone to be used as a hot food takeaway. And indicate that there would be some internal alterations to facilitate that we're not considering because they can be carried out without needing permission explicitly. The plan also indicates the siting of a refuse store area directly to the rear. and that the unit itself is laid out with the ground floor for the cooking and serving area, and then there's a store accessible via stairs internally. Yeah, the elevations are quite hard to see, but you can probably just about see that the only significant external changes would be from the installation of the extraction flue that would project 1.1 metres above the ridge line of the roof space there. This plan is simply a zoomed-in view that shows the internal layouts, and it shows the specifics of the kitchen and extraction equipment. This is a corresponding plan that again shows the extraction system in greater detail. So this has been submitted so our environmental protection officer could fully assess the technical specification along with other details that have been submitted to determine whether it would be appropriate or acceptable in terms of noise and odour, given its context with residential properties nearby. Onto the photograph. So this is a view of the front elevation. So this shows the extended part of the site with the retail unit. So the retail unit was constructed soon after planning consent was granted. It's never been used in any way since it was constructed. I believe the existing business has on occasion used it as a store, but it's never commenced its own individual separate use. This shows also field view running alongside. This is another view of the front, so this shows a wider view of the existing food store. It's worth noting that the existing food store has been extended also in recent years. That includes works to the roof space and also the shop itself, so the shop has expanded in recent years as well. This is Boathook Road, running alongside again. Behind the trees there is the nearest similar business, which is a fish and chip shop takeaway, which I can show you a bit more in a moment. Then this is the view of the side of the site. So you can see there the ridge of the roof, so the extraction flue would project roughly in this area from the ridge. This is a view of the rear of the site. This shows that there's an area of hardstone that belongs to the wider site, so this is used by the existing shop and the occupants of the ancillary accommodation. It shows that there's an area there where the bin could be stored. There's also a door providing access to the rear of the unit that's obscured by this trailer that's currently parked there. So this is the T-junction of Fieldview and Boathook Road. And this is a wide view looking from close to the bend in Fieldview, looking back towards the site with Boathook Road running across the top. This gives some context as well with regard to the nearest residential property, which is located on the opposite side of the junction. And then just to give some wider context and setting, so this is the application site here. This is the nearest similar property or business, which is a fish and chip shop takeaway. So it's the other side of the junction, and there's one residential property in between. It's worth noting that there is an extraction system that projects from the side of the unit that is comparable. One thing to note with regard to this view is that there was a relatively short while ago a refuse bin located in this position roughly next to this charity bin. That's no longer there, so there were concerns raised during the determination of the application that refuse or litter would be a problem if the use was to commence. So in our updates we have recommended that a condition would or could be added requiring the applicants to provide a litter bin next to the hot food takeaway that would be given permission in order to mitigate any problems with litter in the area. In terms of the other concerns raised, there's been several comments that relate directly to traffic problems within the area, traffic issues within the area. In terms of the wider site, the area of hardstone in front of the existing shop is demised to the site. So this is in effect private land. This area here is the existing footway with the highway running alongside. There's no curb that provides vehicular access to this area. However, it's apparent that vehicles are using this area for loading or parking on occasions. The concern has been raised that this kind of informal arrangement would continue and become more common or more frequent, which would then cause issues in terms of highway safety, pedestrian safety. In a similar vein, so this is there's an area where there's no drop curb where it can be evidence that vehicles are using this area to gain access and parking. You can note also that there's double yellow lines close to the T-junction, so there is off-street parking available within the area, but I think it's acknowledged that there's a relatively high number of student units of accommodation within the area, and so there's a history of HMOs being created on Fieldview in particular that have given the perception that there has been an increase in parking problems within the area. In terms of our assessment of that, the unit in question itself was granted permission as an A1 retail unit or an EA use class retail unit. We don't consider that, given the relatively small scale of the proposed hot food takeaway, that the proposed use would significantly differ from the existing use. So that's to say, if the change of use was granted, the intensification in terms of the use of the site could be very much the same as a use that could commence immediately using the current permission from 2018. So we don't consider the proposed change of use significantly alters that situation in terms of the previous or the existing permission. So we don't consider that this would cause significant highways or traffic problems in respect of it changing from one use class to another. Our the County Council's transportation officer has not raised any specific objections to that effect either. In terms of the actual change of use, in terms of the principle, the site is not located within any particular areas of any special designation, so it's not located within a retail area of any sort, so it's free from policy restriction in that sense. So there's nothing that exists to prevent the loss of existing retail floor space. So in that sense, we consider the proposed change of use to be acceptable. It would be bringing an existing unit that has remained vacant since its construction into life, so there would be an element of job creation and adding footfall to the existing businesses in the area. So that in itself we consider to be acceptable. In terms of the design, we acknowledge that the flue would be a noticeable change to the current situation. We worked through several alternatives informally. That would have included having extraction equipment projecting from the side elevation. We concluded that it was preferable to have extraction equipment projecting through the roof rather than the side, because that would ultimately have less of an impact on the overall appearance of the building and would also be further away from the nearest neighbouring dwellings. In terms of amenity, we would have a condition that would ensure that the extraction equipment was installed and maintained and used in accordance with the details that that have been submitted to us, to ensure that harm was not caused in terms of noise or odour. The use of the site, in terms of its hours of operation, we would also add a condition restricting its hours of operation to make sure that it wasn't going beyond hours that would be harmful. So that would assist in making sure that it wasn't operating late into the night, for example. And then there's the additional condition I've mentioned in the update reports, which relates to litter. So overall, we have concluded that the proposed change of use to hot food takeaway is acceptable, and we recommend that this is approved.
Thanks, Stephen, for that. We've got a couple of speakers.
Chair, there's also the supplementary report with additional condition.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah. Judith, did you? Yeah, thank you. We've got two speakers. The first one is Mr. Gerald Bryan, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
This is the latest salami slicing application of this site, a piecemeal application, building something different, and returning for retrospective approval. A single application for the whole scheme is finally proposed may well have been treated differently. Read the officer's report. I believe item 27, I believe, contains a factual error that the bedroom property is only partially occupied by the family. The principal family residence is a bungalow in Fieldview. The surface rooms appear available for rent and observations to keep entry, leaving and parking, so operates as a kind of HMO. The nearby fish and chip shop operates short opening hours and generally contains all parking requirements on its own property, meaning Fieldview is little disturbed by its traffic, and certainly not until 11 p.m. The applicant owned adjoining food store is open all hours, such that the inevitable extra traffic generated in the evening by takeaway will be a complete net extra to that already existing. The forecourt already generates some highly debatable vehicle manoeuvres which will only increase, reversing out into the main road or exiting via the raised curbs at most awkward angles is common. Any extra parking on both roads instantly creates more obstruction to traffic on a busy road. The report generously said parking is available in Fieldview. It is a narrower than standard road, 4.2 metres only. I have submitted a photo such that two cars can only pass with considerable caution. Anything larger parked requires mounting the opposite curb to pass it. Any parking on the pavement potentially causes difficulties to the wheelchair occupant, number 1, and the mobility scooter user at number 22. The double yellow lines are frequently ignored. Turning correctly in Fieldview involves travelling near the end after negotiating a blind bending. Most strangers turn in driveways. The thrust of the officer's report seems to be the takeaway to generate little extra traffic to the shops already improved. I strongly dispute that view. The great majority of customers of the fish and chip shop at Carnival will be for the takeaway. Cycle couriers are quite likely to be involved in deliveries, such that cycle parking police ought to be formally required. Motorised delivery vehicles are also likely to feature prominently in extra traffic and require parking as will staff, yet no specific location as such has been identified. The present off-road parking facing onto Fieldview is generally already full in the evening. The large wheelie food bin will be on sloping ground towards and extremely close to the public footpath, and the opportunity for owners to misbehave some factors importantly effectively block direct access to the principal access door of the 6-bed HMO use-style property. I would contend the location does not comply with building regulations and is not good planning. I would ask councillors to refuse the application or at least defer the decision until further consideration is given to the points I raised. Hopefully my supporting pictures are available. I have copies of my comments available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie.
Well, Mr Brown presented some pictures which I think have been displayed.
Yep, thank you. We also have the agent applicant here.
Have they been displayed?
No, just waiting for comments. So there's one that you purchased, so I can go through the black, yeah, so everything's back on
Cheers.
You need to put your microphone on.
Reversing off the forecourt, that one. The tyre track showing how the forecourt is used and the cars bump down the curbs into Fieldview. The alternative way off the forecourt at the moment, between the post box and the tree. There is no bin outside the fish and chip shop, we covered that one. And showing the width of the Fieldview, a small car actually occupies the full half width of the road, such that anything parked on the road is very difficult, quite awkward to pass. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You've got the applicant here, you have 3 minutes as well. I'll let you have a bit more time as well. Thank you.
I'm Ken Garn, the agent for the applicant, who has run the general stores from the property for a number of years. The family are trying to maintain economic prosperity in the area and are endeavouring to evolve their business to keep up with modern trends and demands. The application proposes a complementary facility to their existing offering, which should help sustain demand and viability into the future. The premises has existing parking which will be utilised by the proposed new facilities, thereby not significantly changing the intensification. There is limited change to the street scene as the building already exists. The ventilation design has been undertaken by specialist consultants to mitigate environmental impact and therefore we are of the opinion that the proposal accords with policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to questions to the planning officer. Councillor Lovick first and then Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chair. The update that we received talks about a bin to be placed. Is it the intention that the bin should be provided by the occupants of the shop of the proposed takeaway? And if so, there's no reference to it in the conditions.
Stephen?
Do we know the current opening hours of the retail shop?
So first of all, yes, the intention would be that the condition require the future occupants to provide a litter bin, and so that would be provided directly in conjunction with the commencing of the use of the proposed use rather. So it's not listed within the report because the way that was discovered. So there was a site visit carried out some time ago that indicated that there was the bin there. I carried out a site visit at the beginning of the week and recorded it in my photographs that that bin is no longer there. So in the report we made reference to that bin being located within a reasonable distance that could be used by both visitors to the fish and chip shop or the other neighbouring businesses, including the proposed one that we're talking about. So in the absence of that bin existing, we've decided it's reasonable to add that as an extra condition to make sure there is a litter bin for use by proposed use and neighbouring businesses within that stretch of Beaufort Road.
And the opening hours for the shop next door?
The opening hours, I don't have those to hand at the moment.
Very long.
But they, I think, broadly speaking, they're convenience retailers that are open early in the morning and go quite late into the evening. So,
I mean, that's relevant from the point of view of it not conflicting, but it being a consideration when another unit opens and has possibly similar opening hours, certainly the latter end. The Highways Authority say that they don't wish to object in principle, but go on to say that cycle parking on the forecourt, they just say two things. Cycle parking on the forecourt would be welcome. Two, the rear parking needs a crossover. Are we going to take those into consideration from the Highway Authority, those two issues?
So, in terms of the provision of cycle parking, we don't have a policy that would specifically require the provision of cycle parking for this proposal. So the Highways Officer has provided a guidance and is suggesting things that he thinks would improve the situation, but they are not bound by policy for us to require such things. And in regard to his other comments, he's specifically referring to the area of hard standing located to the rear that serves the wider site. So you'll see from this photograph that there is a drop curb crossover covering this part, but not the smaller section near the unit. So that is what he's referring to there. And again, that's something that we're not specifically requiring as part of the assessment of this application. It's something that could be dealt with as a separate highways matter or application.
I'm surprised he didn't.
Just questions.
Yes, and I'm saying I'm rather surprised that he didn't comment on the need for a crossover or some sort of way of the traffic being organised at the front of the property. Can I ask you if there is a drop curbs at the front of the property where we saw vehicles going on and off the forecourt?
Well, say there is, but
You're not allowed to speak, I'm sorry.
Alright, so there's one just off the camera on this end. So there's a means of crossing over the footway using a drop curb, but not then exiting it on any other part
Well,
of
you
the site.
think I'll leave it to my comments.
Councillor Graham?
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back on the opening hours point? I think from a planning point of view, I think I'm correct in saying that the opening hours of the shop are not restricted by condition.
No.
However, the application proposes a condition that would restrict the opening hours for takeaway to be
11 to 11.
11.
Councillor Graham?
Thank you. My question is about parking too, and it's been partially answered because the photograph. If we were to walk around the corner from the bit we're now looking at and turn left, thank you. Those cars that I can see back onto a white building, and I don't know if that's part of the shop property or if it's someone else's house. If it's not part of the shop property, then having all those cars reversing towards your windows would be quite unpleasant. So I wanted to ask about the parking and also about how we're going to keep pedestrians safe with a lot more traffic driving onto that forecourt. Cycle racks would be one way to reduce, hopefully, get people from cars onto bikes. But my question is about how we keep pedestrians safe in what's quite a congested road. I mean, there's plenty of times I've been stuck in a tailback on Beaufort Road, and having people driving on and off that forecourt complicates it further.
So the way the site's laid out, this section here is the extension that we've been referring to. Then to the front of the site is the retail unit that exists. Then the upper floor and the section, roughly where the roof joins, is the residential part. So in terms of our understanding of the site historically and currently, this is all operating or owned by the same people. So the accommodation we consider to be ancillary to the existing retail part, and that's how it's been presented to us when we looked at this in previous applications as well. So there has always historically been the retail unit being accessible from the residential part of the site. So in that sense, the parking serves the whole of the site rather than it being specifically just for the residential part or the retail part. In terms of the highway safety, the existing situation is not changing, and our main takeaway from the use or the proposed change of use rather. So when we gave permission in 2018 for the extension, we didn't add any form of restriction or requirements on that retail use. So we don't consider the change of use from the current consent to be substantially different to the proposed consent. We haven't considered it reasonable to require any specific layout changes or provision of parking spaces and so on. The anticipation is that the current way that the area operates, which is to say there's off-street parking available within field view or further along Beaufort Road, would be one of the main ways the site will be accessed. We also are of the opinion that it would be, a lot of the visits to the site would be likely to be done so on foot. So the expectation is that this would be serving, a large part of the business would be serving the student population that lives within close proximity to the area. Having looked in the area, the surrounding area, there are a handful of businesses that offer the same kind of product, but there's not a proliferation in any one space. So we're not expecting the current situation in terms of what's happening currently on the site, or what could happen if the existing use were to commence, to be substantially different to the proposed use.
I've got Councillor Stewley, Councillor Sue Sands, Councillor Moat Sands and Councillor Brewer. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The Transport Officer from Norfolk County Council said that he or she hadn't made a visit yet. Did that change, and was there eventually a visit?
I haven't had any update to confirm either way in that respect. So it's predominantly been a desk-based assessment, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. Well, considering this is the main issue that we're talking about here is traffic and parking, it probably really ought to be assessed properly by the transport officer. It appears that they have assumed that there's adequate parking around the back, but that's obviously parking for residents, and also they've ignored the traffic issues at the front, which clearly there's no room for cars to park there without crossing over that double yellow line.
Councillor Suzanne?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, parking has been an issue. The owner has known that parking has been an issue for a number of years because they, I believe, applied to have the trees cut down to enable there to be extra parking in the past, and of course, we refused that. So my question is that, given that parking has continued to be an issue and is a historical issue, has the council undertaken any investigation into the amount of parking, the frequency of cars parking at the front? As someone who drives frequently down Bowthorpe Road, we do have problems, as quite rightly pointed out by my colleague over here, that it causes hassles with tailbacks of traffic along there. So has the council undertaken any investigation into the parking?
What's the Joe?
No, we've not carried out a traffic assessment in that specific way. What we've assessed is the information that's been presented to us. We are not, in a planning sense, we haven't had anything that has specifically come to us to consider the traffic management of the site. We've determined and approved applications previously that have looked at the site, and given the scale of the site and of the uses that are taking place, we've not considered it reasonable to be adding additional conditions. We don't have policy in place for this use within this part of the city that requires us to do any such modifications to the site by way of providing parking spaces and so on. So that the existing use is very much historic on the site. That shop has, in some form or other, has been there for many, many years. So there are not conditions in place, consequently, that deal with any of those issues that may have arisen over time. So in terms of what we're assessing now, we're looking at the extended part of the site that was given permission in 2018 as to be used as a retail use. We didn't apply any conditional restriction on the parking or the access at that time. And in terms of our assessment of the change to the proposed use of the hot food takeaway, we don't consider that that is substantially different to the use that is already consented for that part of the site.
Yeah, I did have a second one. Okay, the permission was given for retail. In your opinion, and in the opinion, I guess, of the planning officers, would you say that a takeaway is going to have more customers and therefore more cars and a higher frequency than a retail unit?
So the retail unit, when it was granted consent in 2018, informally it was proposed to be used as essentially a cold food takeaway, so it would have been a sandwich shop. So when we were giving that permission in 2018, that was the business proposal that we had in mind. The Commission didn't specifically give permission for that sole use. It was a broad retail use. So in effect, the consent that exists now would allow any form of retail use to take place. So, for example, a shop selling, for example, sandwiches and coffees, or something such as that could operate in very much the same way a hot food takeaway does with unrestricted hours, could take place. So in that respect, we're not considering the potential use that exists currently to be substantially different to the proposed use that we're considering now.
Councillor Moggs?
Thank you, Chair. You partly answered my question. There is existing permission to have a sandwich shop there, but I mean, typically sandwich shops also offer some hot foods, not cooked on the premises, but heated on the premises, like panini, sausage rolls, and pies and pasties, that sort of thing, which essentially is, I mean, it's a semantic difference, but it's really very little difference between what's proposed and what they already have permission for. Really, we're only talking about permission to cook food on the premises. It essentially doesn't change very much at all, am I right?
Yes, that essentially is correct. So in terms of the use class order and the provisions that apply to the different uses, essentially the main difference in terms of the hot food takeaway stepping out of the retail use class that would cover cafes that could serve heated food is that the food is being cooked and prepared exclusively on that site, which therefore then typically requires extraction equipment and other such equipment potentially that would need to be added to the building that then has to formally be considered. So, for example, a cafe could serve a range of heated food that wouldn't require additional equipment to be installed that could cause problems in terms of neighbouring amenity. So that's very much our perspective or our assessment of this rather, in terms of the difference between the use that exists and the proposed use.
Councillor Lodge.
Councillor Sens has half asked my question, but let me just spell this out clearly so I understand what I'm actually voting on. So in terms of, so what's already there could be a sandwich shop. So now I need to consider, is there a material change or anything in addition to that that would allow me to refuse this that is different to what would happen if there was now a sandwich shop, right? So in terms of traffic, probably not. There will probably be, you could argue odour and you could argue amenity in terms of the extraction fan. Is there anything else that's materially different that we can or should take into consideration if we take the example of a sandwich shop versus a takeaway shop?
Can I just come back on that? Because we've talked a lot about a kind of sandwich shop. I think the other thing that we've got...
That's not allowed, by the way, Mr Mayor. Sorry.
I think we've also got to consider now that the retail unit is in Class E, and Class E covers a heck of a lot of stuff that it didn't previously. So that covers shops, it covers restaurants and cafes, it covers a lot of other stuff as well, non-residential institutions, assembly and leisure. So that unit, albeit it's relatively small, could be used for a lot of other things that maybe wasn't anticipated it could be used for when we actually granted permission for a Class A retail use. So when you ask us the question, does a retail use generate the same amount of traffic as a hot food takeaway? I think the answer is it could do, because there's a lot more than just a retail use that could be carried out in that property. And as far as I'm aware, there's no condition on the extension saying that it is simply a Class A retail unit.
Thank you. Councillor Peake and then Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. When it was granted cold food takeaway, it was obviously operating on different times, isn't it? What time was it offered to for closing for the cold food takeaway?
So there weren't restrictions put in place on the original consent for the building. So as I said, when that application was considered, that was what was referred to as being the proposed use. However, we simply, or rather we determined it on the basis of its use class as retail floor space. So we didn't apply specific conditions in terms of the hours of operation.
Councillor Thomas.
Thank you. In plain terms, and that's the only terms we're here to address, it seems to me fairly uncontroversial. As for whether there are any objections, and in planning sense, as Councillor Bergman would say, so we wouldn't be sat here and the officers would have said what they've said. But it's interesting to me that it's described as a hot food takeaway that comes with a plethora of issues. Again, uncontroversial to me, but I understand anyone could object to anything if they want. But hot food, I can't imagine it's another chippy, there's one 2 doors down. It could be a Chinese restaurant, Indian restaurant, could be any number of restaurants. I don't see, that's not an issue for us, of course, but I think it's fairly uncontroversial.
There's some questions.
Yeah, we're still on questions, so but that's the last one. You got a question, Councillor Lovett?
Why are we considering it today? We probably didn't consider it in 2018. Why are we considering it today? Was it an officer decision in 2018? I mean, was it called in by a member? I don't know.
I don't, no idea, but I can answer anyone. Do you know? Probably don't.
It would have didn't meet the requirements to be determined by the committee at the time, so it was determined under delegated powers. And today, because it's received
Objections.
4 objections and it's an application for minor commercial development, so our current scheme of delegation, which would have been different to the previous one, determines that that's the route we've taken.
Okay, we'll move on to discussions, or questions, boys and girls. There's 3 only, put your hand up. Discussion. Okay, Councillor Graham, Councillor Champion, Councillor Bergline, Councillor Lovett.
Sorry, Chair, are we still on questions?
No.
Well, who's moved and seconded it?
Oh yeah, so I've got to move. I move the recommendation is to accept, I move that, have we got seconded for that? Thank you, Councillor Sands. Now we move on to question,
I'm wondering if we have the option of deferring until we've had a proper traffic assessment.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. We need a seconder for that if anyone wants to propose it. She did propose. Councillor Stootley, Councillor Sayers, Lewis Holland, put their hands
I've got
up.
Councillor Stupid seconded.
Yeah. We're now just talking about postponing it. Councillor Bergline?
I entirely sympathise with that, but in planning terms that should have happened in 2018. I disagree with the decision that was made in 2018. I think a traffic assessment should have made there and then, but it won't get us any further because it's already been determined that the kind of traffic that it will be generating is okay for that premises. So we're just faced with, we have to consider the determination in 2018 as material. There's nothing in addition to what that would allow, and then we're obviously stuck with the fact that the government has merged together classes, which now means, that there would be allowed to be even further uses, such as a cafe and a restaurant, that would obviously create potentially a similar amount of traffic. So I sympathise with wanting to defer it and having a traffic assessment. I sympathise with wanting to voting against it. In planning terms, it would just go to appeal and be voted through. Because it's been determined on exactly similar grounds when it comes to traffic in 2018. So I've just, that's so I don't like what we're stuck with, but I think that was a mistake made in 2018 that is now part of what we have to consider.
I've got Councillor Lovett. Did you want to?
Yeah. Yes, I think there have been changes since 2018. We place far more importance on pedestrian, on walking and cycling, and my concern is that this is a very unsatisfactory situation. It happens along Unthank Road, where cars, because there's opportunity to go over the pavement onto a forecourt in forward gear, then they come out sometimes at a different place in reverse gear. It's very dangerous. And I think, if we have any opportunity to improve this, not to refuse, we just want to improve it. I understand that, there's very little we can do, but I would like to feel that it's not a satisfactory situation, and I can't understand anyone thinking that cars can go on and off over that pavement willy-nilly, and pedestrians don't know where they are, and cyclists, and so it's a potential hazard. And as I say, even the government have placed more importance on walking and cycling. Well, if you're going to get more walking and cycling, what you need to do is make it safe, and this isn't safe. So if one could even get some trees planted on the forecourt, or some cycle stands, or something that would restrict the movement to sort of 1 or 2 places where people, where cars cross over the highway, the footpath, and might come out in forward gear, but they come out the same place as they go in. I just think that if we should be able to do something, and if it's a deferral to ask the highways to look at it, then I'm in favour of that. If not, then could we have a talk with the applicant to see if they could put some big planters somewhere to restrict the movement of vehicles over the pavement.
Councillor Stootley first, and then I'll come to you, Dave.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There is an argument being made to suggest there'll be no difference, but clearly there will be a difference because this unit hasn't been used before, so there will be an increase in traffic, whatever it's used for. Obviously, I don't think people go and buy sandwiches at 11 o'clock at night, so the extension of traffic into the evening will be measurable. So we do clearly have a problem with traffic, and I think there should be some common sense applied to this application with a proper review. We've already seen in the report that the transport officer hasn't made a site visit. They should probably make a site visit, perhaps even meet with objectors and find out what the issues are in the area, because it's a known area for congestion related to two units, and also the access onto and off a busy road causes issues, tailbacks and pedestrian safety issues. And the front, where we've got the photograph now, is a particular concern to me if there's going to be more traffic into the area. So I don't think necessarily we have to look at this in terms of refusal, but just having a proper assessment of the parking and safety issues with a view to either refusal or further mitigation. So that's why I'm going to support this proposal to defer, please.
I'm getting a bit confused here, so you either support it or oppose it. I'm not made up my mind, because if we oppose this and go one way, that could come back again with a couple of drop curbs down there to allow cars to come up and over.
Chair, I'm not proposing that we refuse the application. I'm proposing that we defer it so that the traffic officer or other highways experts can have a look at the issue in the area and whether this is actually a suitable change of use.
I'm just worried until they come back and say put a couple of drop curbs in, so the cars are legally allowed to go across. That's my worry.
Well, I don't think that will happen, because if cars are legally allowed to park there, they will be crossing that, especially longer cars, that doesn't look very wide. So if cars are parking there, they will be crossing the double yellow line. Highways officer isn't going to support that.
David?
Excuse me, thank you. I mean, you're perfectly entitled to defer for reconsultation with highways. I don't think you'll get a different response, because the basis of their assessment won't change. And that is, the basis of their assessment is what has already got planning permission. So the fact that the shop unit hasn't been occupied is irrelevant. There is a planning use there that could be occupied tomorrow, with nothing else that we can do about it. And that use is a Class E use, and it could include a plethora of uses that could be as intense as a hot food takeaway. I've outlined some of them. I mean, it could be an off licence, it could be open all hours off licence, it could be anything under Class E. It could be a cafe, restaurant. You'd have no control over the hours. Under planning, there might be controls that you could put in place under other regulations, but in terms of the assessment that we have to make as the local planning authority, there are no controls over that Class E unit that already has planning permission and could be occupied tomorrow. It's an uncomfortable fact that the applicant isn't required to make it safer. They are not required to address issues that already exist. They are only required to address issues that arise from the nature of their development. You can't ask for developers to you certainly can't refuse things on the basis that they're not making things better. You can refuse things on the basis that they're making things worse and not mitigating it. but you can't refuse applications that they're on the basis that they're not making things better. They're not required to make things better, and they're only required to not make things worse. You have to start your assessment with the basis on the basis of what is there at the moment, what has planning permission, what could be done without planning permission. So yes, you are entitled to defer for consideration by county. Again, I don't think you'll get a different response, because I don't think the basis of their response will change. You can see pretty much most of the issues using Street View, things like that, as you've seen most of them in the presentation. They'll be aware of where the curbs are. They've already picked up the fact that there isn't a full width drop curb for the car parking at the back of Field View. So I don't think deferral for a site visit will actually get a different response. The only point that I would make is you could put a condition on requiring cycle parking, because I don't think there's any cycle parking there at the moment, Steve. No. So you could stick a condition on requiring cycle parking, and your justification for that could be mention has been made of kind of deliveries and things like that, and cycle parking. And we've already said in our assessment that we think most of the visitors to the hot food takeaway will come from the surrounding area. So there is, I think, the planning justification for requiring cycle parking, but as I say, I don't think the highways assessment would change if we deferred the item.
We're still talking about deferment. Councillor Sands?
Thank you, Chair. I'm impressed with the photo that you've got up there. I can only think it must have been taken about, I don't know, 6 o'clock in the morning or something, or when the sun was first up. Because if you go on Google Maps, it actually shows what actually happens on Beaufort Road. There's two, I'll come and show you, the council love it.
You're not allowed to use things like that in the council.
Yeah, we can't, you shouldn't really be looking at your phone.
No, you shouldn't be doing it full stop.
This is a bit of evidence for me. What I'm about to say is every time I've been down there, there's been cars parked across the footpath.
Can we share that information? Yeah.
That's
sorry.
There's a van and there's a car.
Councillor Sands,
Can I ask people not to be using mobiles?
And so this is taken about 4 p.m. on Monday.
4 p.m. on Sunday, fine. Okay, if I go down there and weekday, if I go down there...
We're talking about deferral, we're not talking about this thousands of cars.
I am talking about deferment, thank you, Chair.
Okay, I thought you were talking about traffic.
I'm talking about traffic, and I'm talking about access, because I'll tell you what happens. They park across the footpath there, and the only way the people who are actually attending the food centre can get out is to go through the Field Road, and then turn out, turn right, and turn left onto Beaufort Road, which is not an easy manoeuvre at the best of times. And given that Field View is not a very wide road, it's also causing havoc there. People do, as you can see on Google Maps, if you care to go to it, they park across there and actually block the footpath. Now that stops anybody who's wanting to come along, I don't know, with a pushchair, with a mobility scooter, just want to walk.
Yeah.
They can't get by. I'm glad Google Maps has shown that, because that's exactly what the situation is. Now, if you're going to increase the traffic by having a takeaway there, that's not going to improve things, is it? Because even if they don't, I mean, students might walk in, that's other...
So are you against deferment?
Deferment is a good idea. Well, we have a look and see what is actually happening, instead of this picture here that doesn't really show the true picture.
I just thought the way you were speaking is you're against it.
Chair, could we just allow Steve to get... Steve's trying to get that information up.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. As that information is being referred to, if you can get that up, that'd be good.
And if he can't?
He should be. Just a reminder, members, we all need to have the same information, so please could you not look at phones, please, during the meeting.
And what time of day is that?
It's Google Street View, so all we can do is put different times.
So if you're in an ability scooter, you're going to have a bit of a problem with those cars across there.
But I come back to my point that I made earlier, Chair, that's what's happened, that's what happens now.
Yeah.
And we're looking at whether or not this will actually make it worse.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Councillor Stupney?
Thank you, and thank you, David, because I do think that there is likely to be an increase in traffic and parking into the evening, as opposed to the previous permission that was given. If it was a cold food store, people don't go and buy sandwiches at 11 o'clock at night. The other thing you suggested that it could be a number of other uses. Of course, if it was going to be a off licence, it would need a separate licence for that, and I expect that would come to committee. And another observation is that the chip shop down the road, I think, closes at 9:30, so traffic issues into the evening are mitigated there by that timing. I don't know whether that's associated with the planning permission. That's just when they close, so traffic is less there. It's just a shop after 9:30. So I think there would be an increase in traffic into the evening, which is why I think this should be looked at.
Councillor Sands, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. I mean, the question of approval back in 2018 was raised. There's been a retail place, corner shop, grocery store there from way before then, so it's always been a little retail centre. But as fortune would have it, I had a meeting with highways officers yesterday in another part of the city where we were looking at parking issues, amongst which were cars parked on verges, parked on footpaths, and they pointed out that outside of London it's not actually legal for cars to sort of park halfway on the curb in the city. So, you know, we don't have any control over how cars park along there. So, yeah, that's the way it is. You know, unless there's a change in laws or bylaws, those cars that were there in the Google Maps are actually parked there legally.
Okay, Councillor Champion.
So as far as I can determine, within the remit of our role as on this committee, I can see no reason to really object to this. I would like to recommend that we have cycle storage put in place so that we can...
We're just talking about deferring it. That's all we're talking about at this moment.
Yeah, it might affect how people vote on the amendment.
Well, yes, but I agree with you.
I'll wait.
Yeah. So you need to vote against that.
Can we move to the vote on deferral, please?
Do we agree to move to the vote? Thank you. All those in favour of deferring it for a traffic report, please show.
The amendment is to defer for a traffic report, and those voting in favour of that amendment are Councillors Graham, Councillor Peake, Councillor Stookley, Councillor Sue Sands, and Councillor Thomas.
All those against, please show.
Those voting against the amendment to defer are Councillors Davis and Councillor Sands. Mike, did you vote?
No, I didn't vote.
And so
it's 4 abstentions.
those members abstaining from
yeah.
from voting on the amendments, thank you, sorry, are Councillors Begline, Councillor Lubbock, Councillor Champion and Councillor Driver.
Okay.
Which means that by abstaining, it's been agreed to defer.
For a traffic report.
So that then really stops discussion,
yeah,
and we bring it back to a different meeting.
And that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much for everyone.